Hi, welcome to Books and Bocadillos. My name is Mariandrea, and welcome to um, Thursday Night Poetry. I am joining Pat and other booktubers who are doing Poetry Thursdays. The sun is setting, it's sunset time, and I am about to share a couple of poems today. So, I really enjoyed the Poetry Readathon at the end of April, and I missed reading poetry after I finished that project. So, um, I decided to come on and maybe try to read some poetry once a week. So let's see how this goes. I was thinking about how to do this, and what's going on this week for me is I am just getting caught up on Taylor Swift's The Tortured Poets Department album that was recently released in April. It's taken me a few weeks to get to listening to it. I finally listened to it in its entirety and loved it. And as everyone else who's been loving the album and is doing, things to celebrate the album and uh, the idea of tortured poets, I thought, let me look at tortured poets or poetry that resembles that of what you imagine tortured poets would write, and share that with you in celebration of the Tortured Poets Department album. So if you're not a fan of the album, I'm sorry. uh, I just wanted to set a theme for myself, and that's what I'm listening to this week. So that's what I centered my poetry selections around. So the first poem I want to read is from this collection. So this collection is titled New Names for Lost Things, and the poet is Noor Unnahar. I am so sorry if I'm mispronouncing that. Noor is spelled Noor. Unnahar is spelled Unnahar. Um, Noor Unnahar is an artist and poet whose work combines handwritten text, tactile collage, and photography to illuminate themes of hope, home, self-love, culture acceptance, and survival. She lives in Pakistan. The back says, a poetic meditation on identity, loss, and loneliness from the best-selling poet and visual artist. An all-new illustrated poetry collection from the best-selling author of Yesterday I Was the Moon, New Names for Lost Things combines Noor Unahar's powerful poetic voice and her signature collage-style visual art for a book of highly personal reflections on loss, inheritance, and what is left behind on the non-linear path to becoming who you are meant to be. I recently acquired this collection, and I purchased it during the poetry readathon, um, and I didn't get to share anything from it then. But what it appealed to me is that I like journaling. As you saw, if you watched my series, at the end I did like a journaling exercise with recycled poetry, and I like how this poet uses like creative journaling. Um, so there's photographs in here of some of their creative work. It's a lot of collage combined with poetry and photography. And so it's very creative. And the poem that I want to read, I read because I was reading through this collection and I was thinking about the Taylor Swift album. And when I read this, I thought like this sounds like very much aligned or like fitting with the idea of the Tortured Poets Department. Tortured poets. Um, so that Okay, so then a funny thing happened. I was reading articles about this poet. She's very young. Um, and in an interview, I don't remember the date of the interview, but it was, I think, a few years back, maybe like early 2020s. Um, she was interviewed, and some in the interview it said, "What is like a favorite song, or like a song that you're listening to or that you love at this time?" And it was Taylor Swift. And so I thought like, oh, that's so neat that when I read this, I felt like I was reading or like I was relating it to the Taylor Swift album, and this poet likes Taylor Swift. So it just felt like it was fitting. Okay. The title of this poem is A Personal Tragedy. The poem goes like this. This unstitched loneliness keeps bleeding out of my hands. I was always ready to be someone else, to be remembered like a fabricated war history. Reunion with myself remains a personal tragedy. But to be a poet without being tragic would have been quite a shame. And that was A Personal Tragedy by Noor Unnahar. Another thought that this intersected with was I've been reading The Women by Kristin Hannah, and when I read the line, to be remembered like a fabricated war history, that resonated with the novel The Women by Kristin Hannah. And the reunion with myself remains a personal tragedy. Those two lines, to be remembered like a fabricated war history, reunion with myself remains a personal tragedy. I felt very connected to the experience of the women in The Women by Kristin Hannah. If you don't know about The Women by Kristin Hannah, it is a novel about women who served in Vietnam. The main character is one of the women, and her friends help her through getting through their service in Vietnam, and then the coming home and reckoning with not being served, acknowledged, thanked, appreciated, cared for, acknowledged for their service. And yeah, so this poem was connecting on all levels. It's been connecting with the music I've been listening to and the book I've been reading. So this is from New Names for Lost Things by Noor Unnahar. Now, when I think of tortured poets, of course, I think of Sylvia Plath, and I have this collection by Sylvia Plath, the Colossus, and other poems. Sylvia Plath is one of my favorite authors, and I first started reading Sylvia Plath when I was in high school, and of course, being the teenager that I was just like Sylvia Plath's work was like sustenance, like it was something that I felt like I could love and hold on to. And I don't know, it was just very life-giving. Even though I know Sylvia Plath's life is tragic, it ended in tragedy. She died very young. But I want to share some of her poetry because I think of her as a tortured poet. The back of this collection says, excuse me, with the startling, exhilarating book of poems, which was first published in 1960, Sylvia Plath burst into literature with the spectacular force and compression of a geyser. In such classics as The Beekeeper's Daughter, The Disquieting Muses, I Want, and Full Fathom 5, she writes about sows and skeletons, fathers and suicides, about the noisy imperatives of life and the chilly hunger for death, graceful in their craftsmanship, wonderfully original in the imagery, and presenting layer after layer of meaning. The 40 poems in the Colossus are early artifacts excuse me, of genius that still possesses the power to move, delight, and shock. I like this quote, this blurb by Joyce Carol Oates. The blurb says, "The spokeswoman for our most private, most helpless nightmares. Her poetry enchants us." It's Joyce Carol Oates. The poem that I want to read from this collection is titled The Beekeeper's Daughter. Excuse me. The Beekeeper's Daughter. A garden of mouthings, purple, scarlet, speckled black. The great corollas dilate, peeling back their silks. Their musk encroaches circle after circle, a well of scents almost too dense to breathe in. Hieratical in your frock coat, maestro of the bees, you move among the many-breasted hives. My heart under your foot, sister of a stone. Trumpet throats open to the beaks of birds. The golden rain tree drips its powders down. In these little boudoirs, streaked with orange and red, the anthers nod their heads, potent as kings. To father dynasties, the air is rich. Here is a queenship no mother can contest. A fruit that's death to taste, dark flesh, dark parings, in burrows narrow as a finger, solitary bees keep house among the grasses, kneeling down. I set my eye to a whole mouth and meet an eye, round, green, disconsolate as a tear. Father bridegroom in this Easter egg, under the coronal of sugar roses, the queen bee marries the winter of your year. Isn't that beautiful? I loved it. There's so many poems I couldn't decide from, so there's a lot in this collection. If you love tragedy, you love reading poems that are dark and tragic, these are a great dose of that. Next, so that poem that I read from Noor Unnahar, I entered into my little poetry journal, and then I had an experience in which I was drinking coffee or tea. No, I was drinking tea. It was probably English breakfast a couple of mornings ago, and I went to the kitchen. I was drinking it out of a Starbucks mug, and the inside of the Starbucks mug is lined in black. And when I went to go to the sink to put my cup down, I put the mug up to take the last drop of tea that was left in that mug. And when I did this, I saw my reflection inside the mug, and I never paid attention to that. Usually, I don't like, oftentimes just I don't even take the last sip of tea. It's gotten cold and I just let it go. But I went to the sink and I did that. And when I looked inside the mug, I saw my reflection, and it inspired me to draw it in watercolor. So I did a watercolor self-portrait, and I did another recycled poem. So I'll share that with you in just a little bit. So this is the self-portrait I drew in watercolor here in my little poetry journal. This is an A6 Stalogy, and I used the recycled bits from the poetry event the recycled poetry I went to at my local indie in the month of April for Poetry Month, and I came up with this little poem. So this is me looking into my coffee mug after I had a cup of English breakfast. There's a funny face in the lonely and the quiet spill of every day's griefs no one sees. On this other page, I wrote that poem that I read, A Personal Tragedy by Noor Unnahar. So thank you so much for watching, for being here with me today. I hope you enjoyed this poetry video, and I hope to come back next week. Thank you so much for watching. Hasta la proxima. Bye.